Imagine for a moment that you stumbled onto a piece of information so disruptive, so piercingly clear, that the richest and most powerful people on this planet would pay millions, tens of millions, to erase it from existence. That's not a movie script. That's reality. Because the truth is, when knowledge threatens to level the playing field, those sitting at the top don't just get uncomfortable, they panic. And panic at that level doesn't look like fear, it looks like suppression, control, silence. You see, the 0.1% don't operate on the same rule book that you and I were given. They've rewritten the rules, and more importantly, they've hidden the original version. From the moment we enter this world, we're fed a diet of distraction. They tell us to go to school, work hard, get a job, stay out of trouble, maybe save a little, retire at 65, and hope that's enough. They teach us to admire wealth, not question how it was built. They condition us to accept our place in the machine and feel grateful for it. But what if that entire story is a cage? Not a cage made of iron, but of ideas. Ideas planted so deeply in our minds that we don't even realize we're locked in. The most powerful form of slavery isn't one enforced by chains, it's one embraced willingly, unconsciously. And the moment you start to see that, to really see it, you begin to understand why this kind of conversation terrifies the people at the top. Because once you know the truth, truly know it, you can never go back. You stop blaming yourself for struggling. You stop thinking that you're just not working hard enough or that you're unlucky. You stop envying the rich and start seeing the structure. And the moment that awareness clicks into place, their control over you begins to fade. Let me tell you something they don't want you to hear. The greatest power any human being can possess is clarity. Clarity of purpose, clarity of vision, clarity about who they are and what the world is really about. And the one thing the elite fear more than anything isn't a rebellion, or a new law, or a shift in the markets. It's you getting that clarity. Why? Because you are the engine, you are the labor, you are the consumer, the voter, the builder. Everything they have, everything, is built on the belief that you will keep playing your role without ever questioning it. The moment that stops, their entire empire shakes. They don't fear exposure of their wealth. That's already public. They don't fear criticism. They've bought media outlets and PR agencies to spin that. What they fear, what they'd pay millions to avoid, is a mass awakening. A wave of everyday people who stop seeing themselves as cogs and start behaving like creators. Because you weren't born to be a pawn. You weren't born to live paycheck to paycheck, stressed, exhausted, hoping for some miracle. That's not life. That's a program. And the wealthiest 0.1% didn't just benefit from that program, they wrote it. But here's the twist they didn't expect. Some of us read the manual. We studied the mechanics of how they built their empires. We saw how wealth was transferred, not just earned. We realized that the playing field was never level, and more importantly, that it could be changed. But only if we first broke out of the mental prison they spent generations perfecting. And let me be clear, it's not about hating the rich. That's a distraction. It's about understanding the system and knowing you were never meant to stay at the bottom of it. You were born with imagination, with drive, with a voice. But from a young age, they taught you to trade all that for security, for comfort, for a spot in the machine. They handed you a rule book and told you it was the only way. But I'm here to tell you, the rule book is a lie, and they know it. They've known it for centuries. Now, if this truth wasn't dangerous, they wouldn't try so hard to bury it. If it wasn't powerful, they wouldn't throw billions into distractions and noise. The only reason someone would pay millions to delete this message is because it works. It sparks something. It threatens to undo everything they've built, not with violence, but with awareness, with a shift in mindset so profound that the chains of fear, doubt, and limitation start falling off one by one. And once that starts, there's no going back. You don't unsee, you don't unlearn, you evolve. And that, my friend, is the beginning of true power. That's why they're afraid. Let's go deeper. If you want to understand why this message is so dangerous to the people at the very top, you have to understand how they stay there. See, most people think the wealthy are just lucky or smart, or that they worked harder than everyone else. That's the story we're sold, and they're happy for you to believe it. Because if you think their power comes from merit, then you won't question the system that made them untouchable. But the truth is far more calculated. The ultra wealthy, the 0.1%, they don't just have money, they have as leverage, real power. The kind of power that shapes the world you live in before you even wake up in the morning. They own the platforms where you get your news. They influence the policies that govern your life. They sit behind the smiling faces on TV. And while you're hustling, grinding, doing everything right, they're playing a different game entirely. A rigged one. One where the outcome was decided before you even stepped onto the field. You ever wonder why every major narrative seems to follow the same pattern? Why the news cycles all lead you back to fear, division, distraction? That's not random. That's orchestration. It's not about keeping you informed. It's about keeping you focused on the wrong problems. They want you to argue about symptoms while ignoring the source of the disease. Because as long as you're distracted, you're not a threat. You're manageable, predictable. But when you start looking past the noise, when you start following the money and asking who benefits, you begin to see the strings behind the curtain. And you realize something: they've been scripting the show the whole time. Now I want you to think about this. How much of what you believe about success, safety, and status has been programmed into you by people who benefit from you staying small, from you staying afraid, from you staying busy working for their dream while yours collects dust? That's not by accident. That's strategy. They invest in lobbying not to protect democracy, but to steer it. They donate to campaigns not out of generosity, but to own the outcomes. They buy up media not to report truth, but to craft perception. Because perception, when controlled, becomes reality. And if they control how you see the world, they control how you move through it. You think they care who you vote for. They fund both sides. You think they care what social issue is trending. They'll sell you the outrage and the solution, all while cashing in on the ad revenue. That's the game. They've turned everything into a market. Your fears, your hopes, your time, your energy, and the best part, you participate willingly. You call it staying informed. You call it being productive. You call it doing the right thing. But all the while, you're playing their game. And they never step onto the field without stacking the deck first. And here's the kicker. They know most people will never figure it out because most people are too tired, too stressed, too caught up in survival mode to even ask the right questions. And that's exactly how the 0.1% like it. A society on autopilot, dreaming small, consuming endlessly, arguing over crumbs while they feast behind closed doors, but not you. You're here listening to this because something inside you isn't buying the story anymore. Something inside you wants to break the pattern. You're starting to feel that pull. Like there's more to this life than what you've been told. And you're right, because once you realize that power doesn't come from money, it comes from the influence, everything changes. And influence is something they've been cultivating while the rest of the world was watching Netflix. Influence is why a billionaire can lose billions and still control the conversation. It's why they can crash a company, lay off 10,000 workers, and still get invited to speak about leadership. Because it's not about doing what's right. It's about shaping what's seen as right. And what they fear, what terrifies them, is you learning to do the same. You stepping into your own influence. You realizing you don't need to beg for permission to build, create, speak, lead. That you don't have to wait for a gatekeeper to hand you the keys. You can build your own doors, your own audience, your own rules. That's the shift they're trying to delay, not by force, but by seduction. They'll tempt you with convenience, with comfort, with instant gratification. They'll keep you scrolling, watching, comparing, numbing. Because a distracted mind doesn't rebel. A sedated soul doesn't rise. But what if you chose something different? What if you stopped consuming the narrative and started creating one? What if you chose to unplug, step back, and ask yourself, who benefits from me staying silent? Who profits from me staying small? Because when you start thinking like that, you start seeing like them. And the moment you start seeing like them, they lose control. And that's the moment they can't buy back. Let me tell you something that most people never realize until it's too late. The most dangerous prison is the one you can't see. And the cruelest part, most people spend their entire lives inside it and never even know they were trapped. This prison I'm talking about, it's not made of steel bars or concrete walls. It's made of ideas, beliefs, scripts handed to you from birth, passed down from people who didn't know they were prisoners themselves. It's a psychological cage so cleverly designed that it doesn't need guards. It doesn't need alarms. You enforce it on yourself. That's how deep it goes. From the time you could walk, you were told how to think, how to behave, what to value, what to fear. You were handed a life blueprint and told, this is the way. Go to school, get the grades, follow the rules, don't ask too many questions, get a safe job, clock in, clock out, maybe take a vacation if you're lucky, then retire and hope your body and mind are still intact enough to enjoy a few quiet years before it's all over. That's not life. That's programming. You weren't born with limits. You were born with U's potential. But somewhere along the line, that potential got smothered by teachers who told you to sit still, by systems that measured your worth by test scores, by jobs that told you to stay in your lane. And every time you tried to dream a little bigger, speak a little louder, think a little differently, someone was there to nudge you back into the box. Now, here's the part that's hardest for people to accept: you cooperated. Not because you're weak, but because the system is brilliant. It doesn't use force, it uses consent, manufactured consent. It conditions you to believe that you're making your own choices when in reality, those choices have already been decided for you. Think about it. How many decisions in your life have you made because you truly wanted to, versus how many you made because it's what you were supposed to do? How many dreams have you buried because someone else couldn't see them? How many times have you silenced yourself to avoid judgment, rejection, or failure? The system wants you to believe that freedom is just having options. But what good are options if every single one keeps you stuck in the same loop? They've designed a world where the illusion of choice is the trap. You can vote, sure. You can choose your phone, your brand of toothpaste, your streaming subscription. You can express yourself as long as it doesn't challenge the foundation. But start questioning the real structure, the ownership of land, the manipulation of money, the concentration of power, and suddenly things get quiet, or worse, they get hostile. Why? Because a person who starts asking real questions becomes a liability to a system built on unconscious compliance. But here's the twist: you were never meant to be a cog. You were meant to create, not just art, not just content, but a reality. You were born with the ability to design your life, to shape your world, to break cycles. But to do that, you have to wake up from the trance. You have to step back and see the programming for what it is. And that takes courage. Because waking up isn't easy. It means confronting the fact that much of what you were taught about success, happiness, money, identity wasn't truth. It was someone else's agenda. It means grieving the time you lost chasing things you never truly wanted. It means realizing that you were never broken. You were just trained to operate below your potential. But once that realization hits you, everything changes. You stop waiting for permission. You stop asking for validation. You stop needing the system to approve of your dreams. Because now, you are the source. You become dangerous, not because you're loud or angry, but because you're awake. And an awakened mind can't be controlled. They don't fear your rebellion. They fear your clarity. They fear your presence, your peace, your refusal to play by rules that were never designed to serve you. And the funny part is, the moment you start reclaiming your mind, you'll notice how hard they try to pull you back. The people around you will get uncomfortable, not because you're wrong, but because you're no longer predictable. You've broken the rhythm, and now you're reminding them of something they've buried: their own power. You'll hear things like, "You've changed." Good, that's the point. You'll hear, "Be realistic." But what's realistic about spending 40 years building someone else's dream? What's realistic about trading your soul for a paycheck and calling it stability? No, what they call realism is just fear wearing a suit. It's a prison guard in disguise. You've got to choose: do you want to fit in or do you want to wake up? Because you can't do both. And here's the truth that breaks the whole illusion. Once you realize the cage is in your mind, you hold the key. And the moment you use it, everything they fear becomes real. Let's talk about what their wealth really costs. You hear people talk about billionaires like they're legends, icons, as if stacking money to the ceiling is the highest achievement in life. They get statues, headlines, book deals, and private islands. They're celebrated like modern day royalty. But no one ever asks, what was the price the rest of the world paid for that fortune? Because wealth at that level isn't just earned, it's extracted, pulled from somewhere, taken from someone. It's not a reward for contribution, it's a reward for control. And I'm not here to preach some anti success message. I'm all for prosperity, I'm all for creating abundance. But there's a difference between building value and hoarding it. There's a line that gets crossed where wealth stops being about freedom and starts being about domination, ownership, manipulation, power. And when that happens, the cost isn't just financial, it's human, it's emotional, it's environmental, it's spiritual. You ever wonder why, in the richest countries on earth, we still have poverty, homelessness, entire communities where kids grow up without access to clean water, proper food, decent schools, or even hope? How is that possible in a system that celebrates billion-dollar rockets and trillion-dollar corporations? It's possible because someone decided that profit mattered more than people, that margins mattered more than meaning, that quarterly gains were more important than long-term consequences, and those decisions, they didn't just happen in boardrooms. They happened in silence, in the shadows. They happened while the world was distracted, entertained, hypnotized by headlines and algorithms. While you were busy trying to survive, they were pulling the strings of the game, building walls between themselves and everyone else, and calling it success. But let's really define what success means, because somewhere along the way, the definition got corrupted. They want you to think success is owning more, consuming more, flaunting more. But what kind of success allows for millions of children to go hungry while one man decides which luxury jet to fly that morning? What kind of success poisons oceans, displaces families, destroys forests just to bump a stock up a few points? See, the price of their wealth is your struggle, your stress, your 3 a.m. anxiety wondering how to pay the bills, how to keep your job, how to explain to your kids why things are the way they are. You think that's just life. You think that's normal. No. That's engineered. That's the hidden cost no one talks about. They don't pay that price. You do. They live in a bubble, gated communities, private security, personal doctors. When the economy crashes, they fly to another country. When the climate changes, they build underground bunkers. And when society gets too loud, they buy the media and rewrite the story. And what's the story they keep pushing? That you're broke because you didn't try hard enough. That you're struggling because you didn't hustle the right way. That your lack is your fault. It's always your fault, not the system's, not theirs. And you believe it because it's all you've ever been told. It's drilled into you from childhood. Be a good worker, don't question the boss, keep your head down. And if you fall, if you suffer, it's because you didn't follow the program well enough. But here's what they won't tell you: the program was never meant to work for you. It was designed to benefit the few at the expense of the many. You were born into a system where the game was rigged before you even took your first breath. where value was created by your sweat but captured by their systems, where labor is traded for scraps while ownership collects the real rewards. And when you start seeing that, when the fog clears, you realize how deep this goes, because it's not just about money, it's about dignity, about how millions of people walk through life feeling less than, not because they are, but because someone profitably convinced them they were. You want to know why depression is rising, why anxiety is off the charts, why millions of people feel empty, even with full schedules and smartphones in their hands, because we were sold a lie. We were sold the idea that if we just work hard enough, keep our mouths shut, stay in line, one day we'll be rewarded. But that reward keeps moving. It's always just out of reach. And every time you get close, the system shifts to keep you where you are. And meanwhile, the people who control that system keep getting richer, more protected, more detached from the reality they helped create. It's not a conspiracy. It's not some evil master plan. It's just the natural result of unchecked greed and unchallenged power. But here's the part they don't want you to hear. It doesn't have to be this way. This system was built, and anything built can be rebuilt, reimagined. But it starts with awareness, with breaking the trance, with understanding that you're not crazy for feeling that something is wrong. You're just waking up to what's real. They want you to think your suffering is personal, isolated, just yours. But it's not. It's systemic. It's built into the very design of modern society. Because when a small group benefits from the struggle of the masses, they have no incentive to fix it. They have every incentive to maintain it. That's why they'd pay millions to delete this message. Because the moment you understand the cost of their wealth is your future, your time, your health, your life, you stop playing the game. You stop worshiping their status. You stop believing the myth. And that's the first step to taking it all back. There's a question that terrifies the 0.1% more than any protest, any movement, any politician. What if we built this and we can unbuild it? Think about that. If this entire system, this economic machine, this culture of debt, comparison, struggle, and scarcity was constructed by human beings, then it's not permanent, it's not natural, it's not fate, it's design. That means it can be changed, it can be rewritten. But that only happens when people stop accepting the surface level answers and start asking the one question that cracks the whole thing open: a why. Why do I need permission to live freely? Why is success reserved for so few when we all work so hard? Why do I feel like I'm always running out of time, money, peace, while others seem to have endless supplies of it? These are the questions they don't want you asking. Not because you won't find the answer, but because you will. And once you find it, their grip starts to slip. Because here's the truth: the world you live in was built by choices, policies, systems, agendas, everything from what you eat to how you learn to what you believe about your own worth. None of that is random. It's the result of someone else's priorities. And those priorities rarely, if ever, had you in mind. They want you to think your role in society is fixed, that you're just a consumer, a voter, a worker, a follower. But what they don't want you to see is that you're also the builder, the source, the real engine that keeps it all running. And once you wake up to that, you start realizing how much of your life was built on someone else's blueprint. From childhood, you were given a list: go to school, obey the rules, take on debt, get a job, buy a house, stay quiet, keep consuming, never question, never wander off course. And if you do, you're labeled difficult, rebellious, unrealistic. But let me ask you something realistic to hope. To the people benefiting from your obedience, of course they want you to stay small, to stay unsure, to stay apologetic. Because the moment you stop chasing the dream they handed you and start designing your own, they lose control. And that's the nightmare scenario for the 0.1%. They don't want you to realize that your thoughts are powerful, that your voice, your energy, your time, your focus, those are the true currencies of this world. And they've been harvesting them from you like crops, year after year, while convincing you it's your responsibility to feel grateful for it. They want you obsessed with productivity, but never creativity. They want you to consume more than you create. They want you scrolling instead of building, comparing instead of acting, doubting instead of deciding. Because if you stay stuck in those loops, you never rise above them. But the moment you pause, just long enough to breathe, to reflect, to question, you begin to see the architecture of the illusion. And it's always been an illusion. You were never powerless. You were never too late, too old, too poor, too unqualified. You were just conditioned to believe that. And here's the wild part. They didn't even need to convince you directly. They convinced the world around you. Your teachers, your parents, your peers, society, until you inherited a set of limits that don't even belong to you. But once you become aware of it, it becomes your responsibility to unlearn it. They don't want you to realize that you don't need to be the next billionaire or tech mogul to be powerful. Power isn't about owning the system. It's about choosing to no longer be owned was by it. It's about refusing to play by rules that shrink you, refusing to measure your value by money alone, refusing to stay quiet when your heart is screaming that there's more. Because there is. You were never meant to live in survival mode. You were never meant to run on autopilot, to settle, to shrink. You were meant to expand, to create, to break the mold, not fit into it. And when enough people start asking those dangerous questions, why do we accept this? What if there's another way? What if we built this and we can unbuild it? That's when the tipping point happens. That's when cracks appear in the structure. That's when things start to shift, not from the top down, but from the as inside out. They won't tell you that. They'll pretend everything's fine. They'll distract you with upgrades, scandals, clickbait, dopamine division. But behind all of that is fear. Their fear. Because what they fear most isn't collapse, it's consciousness. They fear the day you stop playing the game, the day you stop asking for permission, the day you realize you were never supposed to wait in line. You were supposed to build your own path, because the moment you ask the right question, they can't control the answer. You want to know what really keeps the 0.1% up at night. It's not a market crash. It's not a protest. It's not even regulation, because they can buy their way through all that. They've got legal teams, crisis PR, lobbyists on speed dial. They've already planned for those things. What they haven't planned for, what they can't control, is you waking up. Because once you wake up, once your eyes open to the truth of how this world really operates, you don't just see differently, you become different. You become a force, not loud, not chaotic, but centered, clear, unshakable. And that terrifies them more than anything else. They don't fear noise. They fear awareness. See, as long as you believe the game is fair, they win. As long as you keep chasing what they dangle in front of you, status, likes, upgrades, approval, they win. As long as you stay tired, overworked, confused, addicted to validation, they win. But when you stop playing, when you pull your energy back from the machine and start investing it into yourself, into your vision, into your power, the dynamic shifts completely. You stop reacting to the world and start creating it. That's the moment they lose leverage, because you were never powerless. You were distracted. You were discouraged. You were programmed to doubt yourself, to second guess your intuition, to think small, to stay busy. And every time you questioned your worth, every time you told yourself you weren't ready or good enough, the system smiled, because that's exactly what it was designed to make you do. But now something's changed. Now you're starting to feel it, this restlessness in your gut, this quiet knowing that there's more, that you've been playing beneath your potential, living inside someone else's idea of life. And maybe you can't explain it yet, but you feel it. And that's the beginning. That's how every revolution starts. Not in the streets, but in the soul. They fear that spark inside you because they know how fast it spreads. They know one awakened mind can influence hundreds, thousands. That's how real change happens, not by tearing things down, but by building new things that make the old system irrelevant. They're not afraid of your opinions. They're afraid of your clarity. of your focus, of what happens when you stop giving them your energy and start directing it towards something meaningful. Because you, yes, you, are the asset they can't own, the variable they can't predict, the idea they can't suppress once it catches fire. And if you've ever felt small, invisible, like you don't matter in this world, I want you to hear this clearly. That feeling is not the truth, it's the program. You were never meant to fit in. You were meant to wake people up just by being awake yourself. You were meant to break the cycle, not repeat it. You have no idea how powerful you are when you stop running from who you are. You don't need another degree, another title, another follower count to start owning that truth. You just need to remember. Remember that you're not here to survive. You're here to build, to create, to lift others by becoming the version of yourself that they would pay millions to keep buried. And don't get it twisted. They're not scared of all of us rising at once. They're scared of one of us rising fully. One person stepping so boldly into their truth, so unapologetically into their power, that others look up and say, if they can do it, so can I. That ripple becomes a wave. That wave becomes a storm. And suddenly, their influence, their media, their distractions, they stop working. Because when people become self-led, when they start trusting their inner voice more than the noise outside, game over. You become the threat not because you're violent, but because you're free. Because you no longer need what they sell. You no longer chase what they push. You've reconnected with something deeper than their algorithm could ever reach. And they know once you find that, you'll never go back to who you were. You can't unsee the truth. You can't unfeel your own power. And you won't settle for pretending anymore. So the next time you doubt your voice, the next time you're tempted to shrink, to blend in, to silence that fire inside you, I want you to remember something. You are exactly what they fear, because you were never meant to follow. You were born to lead.